bishop and his vicar were riding through the rain in the Truchas Mountains. Even the white mules, their coats wet and matted into tufts, had turned a slatty hue, and the faces of the two priests were purple and spotted in that singular light. They were on their way to Mora, the third day out, and they did not know just how far they still had to go. Since morning, they had not met a traveler or seen a human habitation. The bishop was going to Mora to assist the father there in a disposing of a crowd of refugees who filled his house. A new settlement in the Conejos Valley had lately been raided by Indians. Many of the inhabitants were killed, and the survivors, who were originally from Mora, had managed to get back home, utterly destitute.
The mules are certainly very tired, Joseph. They ought to be fed. Push on. We will come to shelter for some time before night sets in.
Father Valiant had been praying steadfastly while they crossed the meadows, and he felt confident that St. Joseph would not turn a deaf ear. Before the hour was done, they did indeed come upon a wretched adobe house, so poor and mean that they might not have seen it had it not lain close beside the trail, on the edge of a steep ravine. The stable had looked more habitable than the house, and the priest thought perhaps they could spend the night in it.
What do y'all want?
He's an American, I guess.
There's something I don't like about him.
Dear sir, could we have some shelter for our mules and get some grain for them?
As soon as I get my coat on, you can come in.
Buenos tardes, señora. May Our Lady bless you.
Clear off them chairs for the strangers. They won't eat it if they're priests. Here you, come right along. I'll need you.
There's no doubt of her meaning. Your pistol's loaded, Jean.
Yes, but I neglected to keep it dry. No matter. Senor American, will you be good enough to bring out our mules?
What do you want?
Our mules. We have changed our mind. We will push on to Mora. Here's $1 for your trouble.
What's the matter? My house ain't good enough for you?
No explanation is necessary. Go into the barn and get the mules, Father Joseph.
You dare go in my stable, you priest?
No profanity, senor. We want nothing from you but to get away from your uncivil tongue. Stand where you are.
The man was unarmed. Father Joseph came out with mules which they had not been unsaddled. The poor things were each munching a mouthful, but they needed no urging to be gone. They did not like this place. The moment they felt their riders on their backs, they trotted quickly along the road, which dropped immediately into the arroyo.
I am by no means sure that we can keep on the road, but at least I am sure we are not being followed. We must trust these intelligent beasts. Poor woman. He will suspect her and abuse her, I'm afraid.
He kept seeing her in the darkness as he rode on, her face in the firelight, and her terrible candide. They reached the town of Mora a little after midnight. The father's house was full of refugees, and the two of them were put out on the bed in order the bishop and his vicar could get into it. In the morning, a boy came from the stable and reported that he had found a crazy woman lying in straw, and that she begged to see the two padres who owned the white mules. She was brought in, her clothing cut to rags, her legs and her face, and even her hair so plastered with mud that the priest could scarcely recognize the woman who had saved their lives the night before.
No, I never went back to the house. When the two priests rode away, my husband went to the house to get his gun, and I fell down a canyon behind the stable and tried to come here all night. I thought he was coming for me.
Kneeling before the bishop, she began to relate such horrible things that he stopped her and turned to the native priest.
This is a case for the civil authorities. Is there a magistrate here?
There is no magistrate here, priestesses, but there's no trapper who can, act as an attorney and can take the evidence for y'all.
While he's sent for, have some woman take care of this poor lady.
Here I am, the old trapper. I know this woman. Her name is Magdalena Valdez at Los Ranchos de Teos, and she's like 24 years old. Her husband, Buck Scales, had drifted into Teos with a party of hunters from like somewhere in Wyoming. All white men knew him for a dog. But to Mexican girls, marriage with an American needs coming up in the world. She married him like 6 years ago and has been living with him ever since in that terrible house on the Mora Trail.
During that time, I cannot say it, he has robbed and murdered 4 travelers who had stopped there for the night. They were all strangers. I don't know their names, but one was a German boy who spoke very little Spanish and little English. A nice boy with blue eyes and blonde hair. I prayed for him so much They were all buried in the sandy soil behind the stable. I was always afraid their bodies might wash out in a storm. The horses Buck had ridden off by night and sold to Indians somewhere.
Have you any children?
I had three children, and
He killed them?
I ran away once, back to my parents, but I was afraid he'd kill them if I didn't go back to him. This time when you came, I found courage. I knew you were a good man, and I thought if I ran after them, they could save her. I cannot let him kill anyone else. I ask nothing better than to die myself. If only I could hide near church and a priest for a while, to make my soul right with God.
I'll get some men and, check this out. We'll look for the remains of the men he killed and capture that, well, you know what I mean.
St. Vrain was as good as his word. He and his men returned with scales and put him into an empty stable under guard. This stable was soon surrounded by a crowd of people who loitered to hear the blood-filling threats the prisoner shouted against his wife. Magdalena was kept in the father's house, where she lay on a mat in the corner, begging Father Latour to take her back to Santa Fe, so that her husband could not get at her. In the morning, the magistrate and his party arrived from Teos. The notary told them the facts of the case in the plaza where everyone could hear.
Magdalena, don't you remember me?
Cristobal! Oh, Cristobal!
I'll take you home with me, Magdalena, and you can stay with my wife. You wouldn't be afraid in my house, would you?
No, Cristobal. I would not be afraid with you. I am not a wicked woman.
You are a good girl, Magdalena. Always were. It will be all right. Just leave things to me. Senor Vacario, she can come to me. I live near Taos. My wife is a native woman and she'll be good to her. That varmint won't come about my place. Even if he breaks jail, he knows me. My name is Carson.
Bishop Latour had looked forward to meeting the scout. He had supposed him to be a very large man of powerful body and commanding presence. This Carson was not so tall as the bishop himself, was very slight in frame, modest in manner, and he spoke English with a southern drawl. As he stood there in his buckskin clothes, one felt him standards, loyalty, a code which is not easily put into words, but which is instantly felt when two men live by it comes together.
I have long wanted to meet Kit Carson, even before I came to New Mexico. I have been hoping you would pay me a visit at Santa Fe.
I'm right shy, sir, and I'm always afraid of being disappointed. But I guess it will be all right from now on. You see, sir, I became Catholic when I got married. Just a matter of form, of course. But then I got sick on my last trip to California, and the fathers at one of the missions took care of me. I began to see things different, and thought I might someday be a Catholic in earnest. I was brought up to think priests were rascals, and that the nuns were bad women. All the stuff they talked back in Missouri. A good many of the native priests here bear out that story. Our Padre Martinez at Taos is an old scapegrace. Even if there was one, he's got children and grandchildren in almost every settlement around here. And Padre Lucero at Arroyo Hondo is a miser, takes everything a poor man's got to give him a Christian burial.
The bishop discussed the needs of his people at length with Carson. He felt great confidence in his judgment. The two men were about the same age, both a little over 40, and both had been sobered and sharpened by wide experience. Carson had been guiding world-renowned explorations, but he was still almost as poor as in the days when he was a beaver trapper. He lived in a little adobe house with his Mexican wife. The great country of desert and mountain ranges between Santa Fe and the Pacific coast was not yet mapped or charted. The most reliable map of it was in Kit Carson's brain. This Missourian, whose eye was so quick to read a landscape or a human face, could not read a printed page. He could at that time barely write his own name. Yet one felt in him a quick and discriminating intelligence. That he was illiterate was an accident. He had got ahead of books, gone to where the printing press could not follow him. Out of the hardships of his boyhood, from 14 to 20, picking up a bare living as a cook or mule driver for wagon trains, often in the service of brutal and desperate characters, he had preserved a clean sense of honor and compassionate heart.
You know about Magdalena? I used to see her in Taos when she was such a pretty girl. Ain't it a pity?
The degenerate murderer, Buck Sales, was hanged after a short trial. Early in April, the bishop left Santa Fe on horseback and rode to St. Louis, on his way to attend the provincial council at Baltimore. When he returned in September, he brought back with him 5 courageous nuns, sisters of Laredo, to found a school for girls in motherless Santa Fe. He sent at once for Magdalena and took her into the service of the sisters. She became a housekeeper and manager of the sisters' kitchen. She was devoted to the nuns and so happy in the service of the church that when the bishop visited the school, he used to enter by the kitchen garden in order to see her serene and handsome face. For she became beautiful, as Carson said she had been as a girl. After the blight of her horrible youth was over, she seemed to
The end.